So this is the week in which we try and look at alternatives to things that we just assume are the best, that work. Today we're looking at Uniswap, and particularly a competitor to Uniswap that's doing things in a very different way and that we should have covered on the channel sooner. I am, of course, talking about Bancor and how we can defeat impermanent loss forever, sort of. All of that coming up after this message from our sponsor.
Don't let DeFi interest rate volatility hold you back. With Notional version 2, you can lock in your rates for up to a year. Notional serves borrowers and lenders alike, so you can leverage up your crypto portfolio or build a fixed-rate income stream on your assets on Notional's easy-to-use interface. With version 2 liquidity mining, LPs earn note token incentives, liquidity fees, and interest on deposits of USDC, DAI, ETH, or WBTC. Plus, LPs can even borrow against their liquidity for maximum capital efficiency. Notional.finance. Stability and certainty now available in your crypto portfolio. TracerDAO is a derivatives meta protocol that allows anyone to create a financial market through Tracer's permissionless open source infrastructure. It designs and installs financial derivatives as deployable smart contracts via the Tracer factory. Financial contracts, like the perpetual swap, can be engineered and added to the factory for deployment, where it's voted on by TracerDAO governors before the new market is created. With TracerDAO, they envisage a world where you can effortlessly manage your local consumption risk, things like how much fuel you'll need and use, for example. One of TracerDAO's first products, Perpetual Pools, is a leveraged token that allows individuals to gain fungible, leveraged exposure to a price feed without the risk of liquidation. TracerDAO currently has liquidity mining incentives for users to enter into leveraged positions on either BTC or ETH, and there are extra incentives to provide these fungible leveraged tokens to specific balancer pools, shoring up secondary market liquidity.
So if you didn't know, Bancor is in fact the OG AMM. Before Uniswap, there was Bancor. The whole architecture of what an AMM is originates with Bancor. And because of that, it deserves a loftier place in our consciousness than perhaps it gets at the moment. Today, we're going to try and rectify that. So the reason I started to think about this video was because I saw an article. It was a publication that was put out, and it was posted on the Cornell University website, talking about impermanent loss in Uniswap v3. This is a report that had been done into the effects of IL in Uniswap, because I think it's safe to assume that we have believed that Uniswap was where the action was at. It certainly has all the volume, and so the way Uniswap works is it has people providing liquidity. With the new version of Uniswap v3, all of this concentrated liquidity, we looked at Visor last week, for instance, was allowing liquidity providers to have a much better deal and to do a much better job of providing liquidity and profiting from that activity. Otherwise, why do it? It's pointless. Impermanent loss is a big problem for liquidity providers. This report analyzed 17 different pools covering 43% of TVL, and it found something staggering. So it saw that the total fees earned since the inception till the cutoff date was just shy of $200 million. But they also found that the impermanent loss, the total impermanent loss suffered by LPs during this period was $260 million. So they were basically, in aggregate, those LPs would have been better off by $60.8 million had they simply hodled. So the impermanent loss meant that they were $60 million down. This is on pretty big pools as well, in covering a lot of the TVL within Uniswap. That's pretty staggering, really. I think we're all aware that impermanent loss is a thing, but you kind of feel like with concentrated liquidity, smart traders, smart market makers will be able to put the liquidity in the right place to take advantage of the fees in the right way to ensure that they would come out with a profit. Apparently, not the case. Now, it's important to take a step back here and look who's behind this report. Stefan Loesch from Top A's Blue, but then we see Nate Hyman, Bancor, Nicholas Welsh, Bancor, Mark B. Richardson, Bancor. So take it with a pinch of salt. This report is quantitative, yes, but it's being presented by folks from Bancor. And why on earth would they possibly want to talk about impermanent loss in Uniswap? Well, that's because they believe they have solved it. And to a degree, they have. So Bancor was the first AMN on Ethereum back in 2017. And they proposed this idea of removing order books entirely and introduced this idea of on-chain liquidity pools that paired one pool of tokens with another to allow people to swap between them. And I think most people should be familiar with the idea of dual-sided liquidity provision, where you add equal amounts of one token with another, USDC, DAI, ETH, and that represents your LP position. Then you can do other things with it. That should be fairly familiar by now. With Bancor version 2.1, which is not new by any stretch, but it's something we should have covered a long time ago. I'm glad we're finally doing it. What they wanted to address was impermanent loss and involuntary token exposure. What do they mean by involuntary token exposure? Well, if you have, let's say, a big fat stack of Link and you want to take advantage of liquidity provision, so you're basically going long on Link but want to stake it and earn some rewards on it, you also had to put in an equal amount of ETH. And there were different ways that this could be done, and it could be done so that you would put Link in, and then it would automatically divide that up into ETH as well. And so your LP position was represented equally, but it's still a thing. We now have single-sided token LPing on Uniswap as well, but it's a little bit complicated the way you do it. Bancor version 2.1 was also designed to solve impermanent loss. The thing is, it doesn't solve impermanent loss. Impermanent loss happens no matter what. You can't avoid it. If you have a volatile market, impermanent loss is going to occur. What Bancor is actually trying to do is mitigate it. And that is a different type of solution to simply solving it. So impermanent loss, gone. Involuntary token exposure, gone. Let's see how it works. So they have this thing called Bancor Safe Staking. And the whole idea behind safe staking is you have a token. This is the token that you want to hold on to, but you want to do more with it. You know that LPing is the thing you want to do, so you provide that token to Bancor. That's it. You maintain 100% exposure to that token, which means you can stay long, you can collect the rewards for being a hodler, and you also get swap fees. And those swap fees on Bancor auto-compound. That's not always the case on an AMM, but here it is. And here's the really fun thing about safe staking. Principal protected. If you don't know what that means, it means I put money in, I put value in, I can't lose it. It's protected. So this is something we look at quite often on this channel because it's boomer proof. It's like I want to come out with at least what I put in. I don't want to be losing. And that's quite reassuring. Bancor safe staking promises principal protection. There are some caveats for how it works, but that is the essential promise of Bancor safe staking. Sound interesting? Well, it should. So how does it work? You, the humble LPer, provide liquidity to a pool in the asset of your choice, ETH, BTC, WBTC, Link, or you provide BNT, which is the Bancor network token. It's their native protocol token, and it's the secret sauce which makes everything possible on Bancor. So here's the really cool bit. When you deposit a non-BNT asset into a pool, Bancor themselves co-invest BNT themselves in those pools to match your deposit. So every time you put a token into a pool, Bancor matches you because they have to, but they do. So they consider it a co-investment. And if they're co-invested, that means that they can also profit from it. So this BNT that they invest remains in the pool earning fees until the associated stake, i.e. you, is withdrawn, at which point the protocol burns the BNT it had invested and its accumulated fees. So BNT is a token with an elastic supply. It contracts and expands to demand. So if you put $100,000 worth of Link into a pool, Bancor will put $100,000 worth of BNT into the pool. That's how they do it. They will then earn fees on that BNT the same way that you earn fees on your Link. So this impermanent loss protection. Impermanent loss is when the prices of tokens in a pool diverge in any direction. It causes you to lose out on what would normally be the gains to be had from simply holding an asset. So what they did in version 2.1 of Bancor is they said, we can't solve impermanent loss. We can't make it go away, but what we can do is mitigate it. And we do it by creating essentially an insurance policy for impermanent loss. So what they do is they transfer the risks associated with impermanent loss and the downside of impermanent loss to Bancor. And Bancor essentially aggregates and backstops IL risk across its pools. So the way it does is it uses the fees that it earns from the co-investments it made when, for instance, we talked about putting 100,000 Link in, and then Bancor puts $100,000 worth of BNT in. Bancor earned fees on that, and it uses that to compensate you for impermanent loss if that indeed happens. Pretty wild. So here's how that works. When a user makes a new deposit, the cover offered by your insurance policy increases at a rate of 1% each day the stake remains live and matures to full coverage after 100 days. So you don't get full coverage from the moment you put your tokens into the pool. You have to stay in there for a certain amount of time. And I believe this begins after 30 days. Yeah, there is no IL compensation offer for stakes withdrawn within the first 30 days. So there's a 30-day cliff for compensation. After 100 days, you get the full amount. So you have to stay in for, 3 months before you start to see the full compensation for impermanent loss. So this is designed to kind of create stability within the protocol, so people are not just going in and instantly ripping out their tokens because they've suffered impermanent loss. All good. That seems to me a fairly sensible way of doing it. So it increases at a rate of 1% each day the stake remains live and matures to full coverage after 100 days. This means that even if a token moons in price, an LP is entitled to withdraw the full value of their tokens as if they held them in their wallets, so long as the LP has accrued full protection. So, there is opportunity cost in all of this, and if the price of a token moons halfway through the maturity period and then it drops again at the end of that maturity period, then you're in trouble. But hopefully the fees that you will earn for doing this will make all of that worthwhile. And if you're long anyway, then what do you care? ETH maxes, long, whatever the weather, of course. There are also liquidity mining rewards, and this is quite important because it means that the APR in certain pools is quite a lot higher than it might be, for instance, if you're just doing lending. So pools may be selected by the Bancor DAO for the BNT liquidity mining program. So there are certain pools which are whitelisted, and these are voted on by the DAO to receive these additional rewards. And it looks like it's a 2x multiplier using BNT liquidity mining rewards. So each selected pool receives a fixed emission of minted BNT tokens, which is shared by the pool's LPs. And then LPs may restake their rewards single-sided to the same or a separate pool to compound their yield. And that's it. So I forgot to mention as well that if you stake tokens to a pool, you get paid out in that token as well. But it may well be that, as it says here, if there are not sufficient tokens in a pool to fully compensate an LP for IL in the staked ERC20 token, part of the protection may be paid out in an equal value of BNT. So if there's not enough of, say, your Link in a pool to pay you for impermanent loss protection, then you will be compensated with the balance in BNT tokens because Bancor has BNT tokens to burn. The other thing to bear in mind is only whitelisted pools are eligible for IL insurance. We'll look at that in just a second. So let's go ahead now and take a look at Bancor and see how this actually works. So the Bancor interface is pretty straightforward. You have a trade and an earn side. If you wanted to swap tokens, that's where you're going to do it. Fees quite high on Bancor, I'll be honest, but there you go. It's just a different place to trade. We're interested in the earn side, so we're just going to click on Get Started here. I've already connected my MetaMask up here. You may have to do the same. Does it have a dark mode? Yes, it does. Let's turn it on. Now we're good to go. So here you have a list of pools that we can look at. And some of them are offering pretty juicy returns here. So the ETH BNT pool on the BNT side, 47.57%. But the one that really caught my eye was down here, USDC, 33%. Ha! But there's a caveat. We'll get into that in a second. But again, on the BNT side here, on DAI, 44.75%. DAI on the DAI side, 35.13%. So what this is showing you is the APR that you can receive if you put ETH in, and the APR you can receive if you put BNT in. You can also see the liquidity that's available in the pool. So for ETH BNT, there's $470 million worth of liquidity. Not bad at all. And then there's this thing here, this shield. And in order to understand what that is, we should go to the end where we can see that there are pools that have no shield here. So what's going on there? Well, these pools are, well, there's no liquidity in them at all, so probably not something you want to play around with. But if we go to the first pools here, this indicates that there is IL protection in there. So if you stake to these pools, you are eligible for IL protection, if that's the way you want to go. So how would we go about doing this? Here's this plus button. So let's say, for instance, I wanted to stake to the ETH BNT pool. So I would click plus, and then I would put in the amount of ETH I want to stake in. Yep, I'm going to put 0.5 ETH. I mean, this is not at all the best way to play this, and I'll show you exactly why in a second. What you will also see here is space available, 16,331 ETH space available. So this is basically saying if you want to stake ETH into this pool, there is still available space for you. We could click on the BNT side, for instance, and we would see that there's 20 million BNT. So this is basically saying what slots are available for you to stake. That's important, as we'll see in a second. But if I wanted to go ahead and stake and protect, you'll notice it says not just stake my ETH, then we run into our first problem. Because the estimated gas fee is $348, which I don't really feel like paying today. So once again, we hit this buffer where actually working in DeFi, working on Ethereum is just too expensive to make it feasible unless you're really, looking at six figures plus, which is annoying because all of this is really clever. And I would love to see it implemented on a chain where it wasn't so expensive, and hopefully we will, because the way Bancor does it is very cool. It's just, there's no way I would do this. So we're going to reject that for now and go back and look at a different pool. So for instance, this USDC pool. I do like the idea of 33% on USDC. That sounds good to me. Oh no, there's no USDC available. We actually need to supply a lot more BNT to the pool to enable that to happen. Of course, we could supply BNT, and then we would earn quite handsomely. And you keep coming across this again and again and again. All the juicy APRs on the USDC, on USDT, DAI that look great in principle. Unfortunately, there's no space left. However, if you are prepared to ride the volatility roller coaster with BNT, then there are some fantastic opportunities here. The APRs are very high indeed, 48, 47%, but you have to be supplying BNT. So if that's the game that you want to play, then this can entirely work for you. And if you're going long on BNT and you believe this is a system that can work, fantastic. But as you can see, some caveats, it's not as clear-cut as you would like it to be. However, the ability to mitigate impermanent loss is definitely something that I think other projects can learn from. And again, I'm always looking at Terra or Akala here for an ecosystem that has the ability to generate the surplus liquidity to be able to mitigate things like impermanent loss. So that is our very quick look at Bancor. There's just one other thing I wanted to show you, which was what happens if you have in fact staked. So this is what the dashboard would look like if you have indeed staked into Bancor. And you'll see specifically up here, protected value and claimable value. This will represent the difference between the amount that is actually protected from impermanent loss and the amount that you can claim based on how long your stake has been in the pool. So if you're under the 100 days, those two numbers will be different. If you're over the 100 days, they will be the same. And then you have the usual, how much you've earned, your claimable rewards, all of these kind of things. And that's basically it. It should be fairly straightforward once you've got there. But for me, right now, the gas fees, the amount I want to put in, it just doesn't make it worthwhile. But I'm always looking out for ideas that go beyond. And it was shocking to me, genuinely shocking, just how lopsided LPing on Uniswap is at the moment. And again, take it with a pinch of salt. You know who wrote the presentation, and of course, always do your homework. So this was Bancor version 2. Really interesting look at mitigating impermanent loss. Hope to see more of these kinds of principal protected staking mechanisms in the future. If you have any suggestions for us for a tutorial, drop them in the comments below. Until next time, ding that bell, subscribe, like, dislike if you want to dislike, do all of those good things. We're on a mission to get to 100,000 subscribers by the end of the year. I think we'll get there. But if we don't, well then we don't. But we'll need your help to get there. So spread the word. Peace.